I mean, you probably think Spirit's airplanes are just rotting in a junkyard somewhere right now, and most of them were actually never Spirit's planes, and a lot of them, well, they're already flying for someone else, because on May 2nd at 3 in the morning, Spirit Airlines sent an email telling its own passengers not to come to the airport. Every flight was canceled for good. By sunrise, 17,000 people were out of work, and a couple million plane tickets were worth absolutely nothing. And here's the part that got me. While everyone was arguing about refunds and worthless points, something else was already happening quietly, legally, on a schedule that had been set weeks earlier. The planes were being sorted, the gates were being sold, the valuable pieces were getting carved off and handed to the exact same companies that had spent 2 years squeezing Spirit to death, because a dead airline isn't a tragedy to the people who matter here. It's an estate sale, and Spirit, it turns out, was worth a lot more dead than alive. That's what I want to show you here, not why Spirit died. Everyone's done that video already. So what happens to the body? Who shows up to claim the pieces? And why nobody with the power to save Spirit Airlines ever lifted a finger to do it? So stick with me, because the answer to that last one is colder than you think. Let's start with how it died, because the way it died tells you everything about what came after. Spirit was the airline that everybody loved to hate. The bright yellow planes, seats that didn't recline, a fee what felt like breathing. But here's the thing that people forget about. For years, the model printed money. Cheap fares, packed planes, no frills, fly the plane more hours a day than anyone else. Then it started to come apart, and it came apart from 3 directions at once. First, the rescue that didn't happen. So back in 2022, JetBlue agreed to buy Spirit Airlines for almost $4 billion. A federal judge went ahead and killed the deal in early 2024 on antitrust grounds. So Spirit, well, they were suddenly alone, with its stock falling off of a cliff. Second, the engines. A big chunk of Spirit's newest jets ran on Pratt & Whitney engines that actually turned out to have a defect, so airlines had to ground those planes for inspection. So what Spirit had is brand new aircrafts that it had paid for sitting on the tarmac, earning nothing. Remember that detail. Those grounded engines come back at the end of this story, and they come back in a way that you probably won't expect. Third, the copycats. The big airlines like American, United, Delta, well, they all rolled out their own bare bones basic economy fares. They matched Spirit on price, and then they beat it on everything else. Spirit's entire reason to exist just quietly kind of evaporated. So the money ran out. Spirit filed for bankruptcy in November of 2024, came out the next spring, and then they did something that almost no company ever does. 4 months later, they filed again. Now, in the industry, they call that Chapter 22, which is 2 Chapter 11s back to back. It almost never happens because it almost never works. And by the second filing, Spirit owed around $7.5 billion. Its own credit card processor, well, they were so sure the airline was going down that it started holding back up to $3 million a day of Spirit's ticket money, just in case. The companies that owned Spirit's planes started sending termination notices. The walls were closing in, and then came the last hit, and it came from the other side of the world. So in the spring of 2026, the US and Israel struck Iran, and the price of jet fuel spiked overnight. You remember this, it wasn't that long ago. Spirit's own lawyers stood up in a bankruptcy court and said fuel costs jumped by around $100 million in March and April alone. There was a last-ditch plan for a $500 million federal rescue, a loan that actually could have handed the US government most of the company, but the bondholders said no, and that was it. Which brings us back to the 3 in the morning email. Now, why 3 in the morning? Why the secrecy? Well, I assumed it was just bad PR management. It wasn't. It isn't. It's deliberate, and the reason is kind of chilling. Spirit's CEO explained it himself. If you announce a shutdown in advance, he said, the vendors stop working, the fuelers stop fueling, some of the crew members just don't show up to their shifts, and when you've got planes and passengers stranded all over the world with nobody to fly them home, you just wait. You run the last flights as normal, you get every jet on the ground and every crew accounted for, and then, in the dead of the night, you flip the switch all at once. The final Spirit flight landed in Dallas just after midnight. Hours later, the company was gone. That's the clean version here. This is the orderly shutdown, but the shutdown was the easy part. The machine that came next had been waiting to start for months. And this is where every other video about Spirit stops, and this is actually where the real story finally begins. So picture those planes, 114 bright yellow Airbus jets grounded overnight. Now your gut might say that they belong to Spirit, and now they're just gonna sit there until somebody scraps them or auctions them off, but your gut is wrong. And it's wrong in a way that quietly explains this whole collapse. Spirit Airlines didn't own most of its planes, it rented them, and at its peak, roughly 3 out of every 4 jets in that fleet were leased from other companies. And here's the part that should bother you. You probably never heard of the name of the company that owned them. It's called AerCap. AerCap controls more than 3,500 aircraft. AerCap's one of the largest owners of airplanes on the entire planet, and it's nearly invisible to the public. You know, there's a decent chance that the last plane you flew on was technically owned by a leasing company, not the airline whose logo was on the tail. Now, you would assume that when an airline goes bankrupt, everybody has to wait in line for their money. The lessors, the banks, all of them stuck in the same slow court process. And for almost everyone that's true, but not for planes. There's a piece of US bankruptcy law, section 1110, that exists specifically to protect the people who own aircraft. It gives them a 60-day clock. The airline either keeps paying on the jet or it hands the jet back. No years-long flight. So the moment Spirit died, the law didn't make the plane owners wait. It handed their other planes back almost immediately, free to fly somewhere else and start earning again, which created a very strange problem. Somebody had to physically move those jets, 90-something planes scattered across around 26 airports. Well, they all needed to fly to long-term desert storage in Arizona, so a company called Nomadic Aviation got the contract. And to fly the planes, well, they needed pilots. So who did they hire? Well, they hired Spirit's pilots. The same one that had been laid off days earlier. About 20 of them said yes, and honestly, what choice did they have? They had lost their careers at 3 in the morning by email, and this was offering them a paycheck and one last flight. One of them, a former Spirit captain named Brandon Keene, was 39 years old and suddenly hunting for any cockpit that would take him, right? So these pilots climbed back into the same yellow jets that they'd been flying weeks before, Spirit's name still painted on the tail, and they flew them out to the boneyard. One tail number went to Alabama, a couple went down to El Salvador. I want you to sit with that image for a second because this is the whole story in one frame. The people who lost everything were paid to deliver the assets to the people who lost nothing. They flew their own airline to its grave, and it wasn't only the pilots who came to say goodbye. A woman named Suzanne McKenna was Spirit's very first flight attendant, hired back in 1990. 36 years she gave to that company. When she heard the final flight was leaving Atlantic City, one of Spirit's original home bases, she drove out to the airport. The staff walked her out near the runway. She stood there in the rain and watched the last yellow Airbus climb into the sky and simply disappear. That's the human cost. And here's the machine running right beside it in the same hours, completely indifferent. Those planes weren't flown to the desert to die. The newer ones were worth a fortune. I mean, remember those defective Pratt & Whitney engines, the ones that helped sink Spirit? There's a shortage of them across the whole industry right now, so crews strip them off the dead jets, refurbish them, and then lease them right back out at a premium. The exact engine problem that helped kill Spirit Airlines turned Spirit's leftover engines into treasure. The company couldn't survive its assets, but its assets survived just fine without it. AerCap took its planes back into a market where rental rates were climbing. Analysts actually said that the firm turned one of the worst collapses in the industry into one of its best years. I mean, let that land. The death of Spirit Airlines, for the people who actually own Spirit planes, really good year. So that's the jets, but an airline is more than just planes, and the next pieces sold for some of the biggest money of all. So when you fly out of a busy airport, your airline needs two invisible things: a gate to pull up to, well, I guess that's visible, and a slot, which is just a legal permission to take off or land at a specific time. At a packed airport, there are only so many of each, right? So you can't make more of them, and that scarcity really makes them worth a staggering amount of money, and Spirit had them. And on the way down, it had to sell them. So at O'Hare in Chicago, Spirit's gates went straight to its rivals. American paid $30 million for a pair of them. United paid $30 million for another pair of them. And this is the same United whose CEO had publicly sneered that Spirit's assets weren't even in his wheelhouse, then turned around and swore that he would not let American grab a single gate at his expense. The vultures weren't just circling, they were elbowing each other, but the real prize was in New York. Spirit held 22 takeoff and landing slots at LaGuardia worth around $87 million, and those touched off a genuine brawl. The FFA said it wanted those slots handed to another budget airline to keep some cheap competition alive, or else just retired. So the agency that runs the airport said, hold on, you can't sell these like they belong to you. That flight is still going. So step back and look at the whole picture now. The planes flow back to the leasing companies. The engines get torn off and resold into a shortage. The gates and the slots get auctioned off to the survivors for tens of millions apiece. And piece by piece, the airline gets more valuable the more you tear it apart, which leaves one question. In all of this, where are the passengers and the workers? Where are you? You're at the bottom, right? The very bottom. When a company dies, the money flows up the ladder, and the ladder has a very strict order. Secured lenders and banks sit near the top. The plane owners sit right behind them, protected by that special law. The suppliers come next, and then, dead last, underneath all of them, are the regular people. It's the passengers holding a ticket that's now just a piece of paper, the loyal customer sitting on a pile of free Spirit points that the company itself admitted in writing it cannot refund. You know, in the eyes of the process, you're not a wronged customer, you're just an unsecured creditor, the lowest rank that exists. So if you paid with a credit card, your one real shot at getting your money back is a chargeback through your own bank, not through Spirit. And the workers got it worse. Spirit gave them 0 days of warning. Now, federal law generally requires 60 days, so former employers filed a class action saying the company broke that law by emailing them in the middle of the night instead of giving proper notice. And here's the detail that really stings. Around that same time, Spirit went to the court asking permission to pay out around $10.7 million in retention bonuses to keep a small group of staff and executives on through the shutdown. Run that back. The people at the top got bonuses to turn off the lights. The people at the bottom got an email at 3 a.m. That's the machine. And once you see it working, it's kind of hard to unsee. A dead airline is worth more in pieces than it ever was in one piece. The jets, the engines, the gates, the slots, all of it flows upward to the lenders and the plane owners and the rival airlines. And here's the cold part that I promised you at the start. That isn't the tragic accident at the end of the story. That is the reason there was no rescue. Nobody with real money stepped in to save Spirit, and the reason is because the people with real money ran the numbers. And then the numbers said the corpse was worth more than the patient. One airline executive put it about as bluntly as it gets. Asked about Spirit's odds, he said, off a cliff they go. Because I'm good at math, and he was good at math. Spirit was the first major US airline to die for purely financial reasons in 25 years, and it won't be the last, because right now, the other budget carriers are flashing some of the same warning signs. Frontier's handing 24 leased jets back early, and they're shoving deliveries years into the future. Allegiant just bought another airline to prop itself up. The same cracks that ran through Spirit are now starting to show up on the ones that are still flying. So the real question was never, hey, what happened to Spirit? It's which one of them is standing closest to the edge right now. And I went and looked, and one of them's a lot closer than its passengers realize, and that's the next video. So subscribe, and I'll show you who.